a murder mystery. We all love a good old-fashioned murder mystery, don't we? Unless we turn out to be one of the suspects. Traditionally, it happens in a stately home, mutually mistrustful strangers shut away in some bizarre building. But people don't live in stately homes anymore. They're all conference centres and day spas, office buildings. That's where people are. That's where murder mysteries should happen now. And at the end, when the detective assembles his suspects to tell them who done it, not a drawing room, a meeting room, a presentation like this, in meeting room 13.3, opposite the design department of Mary Mead Marple, next to the coffee machine. It sums up a lot, that coffee machine. Literally, it records everything, from the morning wake me up to the late night keep me going. It begins with an extra strong cappuccino at 9:14 a.m. That's for Ali Campion, our design manager, who likes to think of herself as a frothy sort of person, but underneath is a double-shot neurotic pounding away at her emails like the Gene Krupa of the keyboard. Then there's me, Linus Sweet, white Americano at 9:42, that morning discovering a mysterious paintbrush left on my desk. I couldn't figure out where it had come from, so I just threw it away. This was a mistake. 9:51, flat white, which is Blake Sexton, our lead designer. This is a change for him. Up till a few days ago, he'd been hot water for his chamomile tea. He's been stressed. A rebranding project for Whimsy Media, but the project has been delivered and he's back on the Java. But there is some hot water at 9:56, which is Hira Poire, who will steep something dark and foul in it and call it tea. I could have sworn I glimpsed Blake and Hira wandering up from the station together just 15 minutes before, but here they are, arriving very obviously separately. I'm sure they have their reasons. And then, finally, at 10:09, there's a double espresso for Sam Shovel, our illustrator, just late enough to be late, but not so late that anybody's going to make a fuss. A man who has raised sullen and unproductive insolence to an art form, especially on a Thursday morning, because that's our weekly team meeting in 13.3. Only on the morning of Thursday the 28th of May, we can't get into the room because the door is locked. This is unusual and unlikely. The rest of the floor is empty, and I doubt anyone else in the building knows that the room, or indeed our department, even exist, but locked it is. And all the blinds closed. And a smell like fresh paint. So maintenance is called and they send a man who goes away again, comes back with tools and takes the door off its hinges. And inside, a bare meeting room, air conditioning on, but the smell of fresh paint still strong. The tables and chairs have been pushed to the walls, clearing the floor apart from one chair, because there, in the middle of the room, sits, completely naked, a middle-aged woman. A woman none of us recognize, clothed or unclothed. A woman painted from head to foot a bright, startling orange. A woman totally orange and very, very dead. So that was a short meeting, followed by a series of very long ones after the police arrived, which is when we found out who the woman was. Shirley Holmes, managing director of Whimsy Media. Things begin to get interesting. Mary Mead Marple has a mania for buying other companies. Whimsy Media was a new acquisition and they wanted a fresh identity, which was our job. Hira was handling the print, I was on the visualizations, Sam was developing logos, Ali was in charge of hair tearing and shouting. The shouting was mostly about the colour. We couldn't find a colour that anyone was happy with. Blue was too boring, brown is turgid, yellows were insipid and purple too goth. It was, at last, Blake, who fetched back from his father's shed a tin of ancient paint. The perfect shade. We finally had it right. Orange. startling orange. And then the client feedback came. Not much, just one sentence. One terrible sentence. Shirley doesn't like orange. There was shouting then, some crying, even, I have to admit, death threats. And now here she was, that Shirley. And it was the orange that had been the death of her, because Blake's paint was of a vintage that contains xylene, which is toxic, especially if you're drugged with sleeping pills, stripped naked, and covered in the stuff. Shirley Holmes, painted to death in her least favourite colour. What every good murder mystery has is data. Train timetables. Who was in the library when, with whom, how quickly poisonous paint can kill someone. And this mystery has data. It's not just the coffee machine. This building hoards data. The air conditioning, the lighting, the security gates. See, we all have security cards. Most of the time, if we don't lose them, which some of us do. Too often, apparently, although I don't see why I have to get a telling off every time I do. They must be used to it by now. Anyway, we have to swipe with these security cards to get into the building, and every swipe is recorded in the system, which is not at all sinister, by the way. The reason why this is interesting is that by looking at these records, the police could see who was in the building at the time of death, which, judging from rigor mortis, was around 9 o'clock. This data was handy for the police, but not so great for me, since the last card to swipe through the security gates was mine. The key data for any detective are three things: motive, means, and opportunity. Well, we all had motive. Shirley didn't like orange, and we had means, that very tin of orange paint. And now here was opportunity. Linus Sweet, me, all alone in the department while the murder was committed. All alone and presumably busy painting Shirley Holmes to death with a paintbrush that of course now had my fingerprints on it. But I don't murder people. I make charts. And with the data stacking up against me, I realised that if I was to find out which one of us really done it, I was going to have to turn data visualisation detective. So the data says I was all alone in the building while Shirley Holmes was being fatally coloured in that cold and empty meeting room. But here's the thing, that cold room. I noticed that when we first found her, the air conditioning was on and cranked right up too. And the record showed that it was put on high at around 6:30 and left like that, which means it was pretty cold in there that night. Not that Shirley cared, she was pretty cold herself by then, but I did, because it turned out to be cold enough to actually delay the onset of rigor mortis, which means we have to recalculate the time of death, putting it back to 7 o'clock, at a time when, according to their pass cards, Blake and Hera were also in the office. She has a dark streak, Hera. She once told me she doesn't drink because every time she gets drunk she just wants to kill everyone. After the Shirley doesn't like orange email, we all fantasized about killing Miss Holmes, but it was Hera who suggested poisoning her. And the paint Shirley was poisoned with? That belonged to Blake, of course. And even if Blake or Hera didn't do it themselves, they had to be willing accomplices, because there they are, sitting at their desks in full view of meeting room 13.3 while Shirley Holmes is sitting in there being daubed to death. Or were they? The whole office has motion-sensitive lights. Sit still for a quarter of an hour and you'll be automatically plunged into a Stygian gloom. But if we look at the data for the lights, the mystery, like the shadows, deepens. The lights in the office switch themselves off after everyone's gone home and only come on again for a quarter of an hour or so after that, which means Blake and Hera are just sitting there, motionless, in the dark, all that time. Can this data be accurate? I mean, it also shows the lights coming on in interview room 13.4 at 20 to 6, and that can't be right, can it? I mean, it's barely a room. more a windowless cubbyhole tucked between the office supplies alcove and the gents' lavatories, right down the other, completely empty end of the floor. Why would anyone be in there? Following the murder, the whole floor has been sealed off, which means the cleaners haven't been round since that night, which means I was still able to find 2 used condoms in the waste paper basket in interview room 13.4. It's right next to the gents, but you left them for the cleaners. Suave. Personally, I don't get having sex in the office. I guess I just don't find staplers that erotic, but at least we know now that Blake and Hera were doing their moving around elsewhere, interviewing each other's brains out in 13.4 and presumably concentrating hard enough on it not to notice Shirley and the murderer come into the office. And we already know the murderer was me, don't we? I mean, I'm a pretty despicable human being. I never do my timesheets. I lose my security pass constantly. But this might not be such a bad thing. At least for me. Because the raw data shows that each card has a unique ID, and it turns out that the card I swiped out with at 5:29 was not the same pass that swiped back in half an hour later. It was, instead, a pass I had lost a week before. So if it wasn't me swiping in with that pass, and Blake and Hera are busily stapling away down the corridor at the time, that leaves Ali Campion or Sam Shovel as our suspects. Ever noticed those dark patches in the concrete of zoo cages worn by animals pacing back and forth in boredom? Take a look at office carpets someday. Same thing. Offices are habit forming, like coffee. That coffee machine holds our habits. My mid-morning pickup, Ali's coffee with lunch, Blake's 4 o'clock cup of tea, pacing back and forth across our enclosure to the machine. And the thing about patterns like these is that they make the outliers even more obvious. Like a latte. The machine made a latte at 6:15 on the night of the murder. The only lattes made in this office are made for visitors. A visitor like Shirley Holmes. Made for her by the murderer. But habits are hard to shake. The murderer made themselves a coffee too. A double espresso. And those do turn up on our machine. Regularly. Every morning at 10 a.m. and every afternoon at 4, and then one more. The evening of the 27th at 6:15, the evening Shirley Holmes was killed. The solution to a good murder mystery lies in the data, because the data can't lie. And that's why I've called you all here, to tell you who done it. To tell you it was Sam Shovel killed Shirley Holmes with the orange paint in meeting room 13.3.